Hi AP, this is part 2 of chapter 22, Modulation to Closely Related Keys. We're going all the way down to closely related keys. If you're following along in the PowerPoint, which I hope you are, please check for that on Google Classroom. Also, please make sure that you're following along there to listen to those recordings that I can't play through this screencaster. The chapter is also on Google Classroom for you if you want more information. So, closely related keys are basically any chord that comes from this diatonic pitch collection within the key. So in D major, any of those chords built on the 2, the E minor chord, the F sharp minor chord, the G major chord, and so on, any of those chords that naturally occur in the key of D major are considered to also be closely related keys. If you think about the key signatures of these chords, you'll notice that the key signatures are very close to D major. Usually a closely related key is considered to have the same key signature, so like a relative minor, or an extra or one fewer accidental. So if we're looking, D major has F sharp and C sharp in it. G major has F sharp in it, just one sharp instead of 2. E minor has 1 sharp, it's relative minor to G major. A major has 3 sharps, that's 1 more sharp than D major with 2 sharps. So usually closely related keys are very close in key signature as well, with again maybe 1 extra accidental or 1 accidental fewer. We can see the same thing in A minor, with the only exception being these diminished chords. Those are exceptions because they're different. Those aren't really key signatures, they're a chord quality, and we're going to leave those out when it comes to using diatonic pitch collections to determine a closely related key. So remember, these closely related keys come from the chords of the parent key, and usually their key signatures are very similar. One more example. A minor, no sharps or flats. F major, 1 flat. So you're either, or G major, 1 sharp. You're adding or subtracting an accidental or using the relative major key signature. So usually the key signatures are very, very similar. Here's an example showing other pivot chord modulations. We're in the key of D minor, and we're modulating, instead of modulating to the relative minor, we're modulating to the minor 5. We're modulating to A minor. So we're going from D minor to A minor. We're seeing that we have a D minor chord, which is a minor 1 in the original key, or a minor 4 in the minor 5 key. So a little confusing, but basically we're showing that it's not just using a pivot chord, or it's not just going from relative major to relative minor. You can also go from the minor 1 to the minor 5. Just again highlighting the relationship between tonic and dominant chords. So make sure you give that a listen. Here we have a comparison of chords in D minor and A minor, kind of seeing how we have the same triads, but how they're analyzed differently between the 2 keys. So we have our minor 1 and our minor 5. So that tonic-dominant relationship is even applicable when we're modulating, even in minor. We have several chords that we could use to go from the minor 1 to the minor 5. Same idea here, but from the major 1 to the major 5 triad. You'll be able to see those similar chords between the 2 different keys that could help you pivot from one to the other. For a brief summary, the smoothest pivots are chords that occur in the predominant function area in both keys. That means if you have a common chord between the 2 keys and you can make it have a predominant function in that new key, it sets you up for being able to continue to write in that new key. It sets up that phrase structure so it can be more effective, that key change is more effective and that modulation is more effective so that you can really feel that new tonic area land. When you construct a chart, if you want to make a chart of common chords between two different keys, pay careful attention to the two key signatures. Make sure that the chord in common is correct and you're not missing any accidentals. And finally, keep in mind that some closely related keys are more easily reached by a different method, such as initial tonicization, which would kind of be like using your secondary dominants to set up the new key, confirmed by the continuation in the new key or sequence. So if you had a 5 of 5 to 5, and that 5 is your new tonic, then you just continue in that key. If you're in the key of D and you have a 5 of 5, you have an E chord to a 5, an A chord, and then you just continue in A major. There you go. Sometimes you want to use the easier route because it's the smoothest route. So don't sacrifice the quality of your music, the art of your music, but think about the smoothest way. Usually the most effective modulations are ones that don't slap you in the face. So here are just some general rules for writing a pivot chord modulation. You want to establish the key, identify any possible pivots, write a progression in the key, make sure you have a phrase, you have that predominant, dominant tonic really established, and then you can continue from the pivot chord in that new key. A cadence in the new key is what really, really marks it. It means I did this on purpose. I changed keys on purpose. So you'll have to listen to this on your PowerPoint, but direct modulations or abrupt modulations are just that. It's when you end a phrase and the next phrase is in a new key. You can also go to a new key by dominant to tonic motion in the new key, which is that 5-1 movement, because that's very effective in tonicization, but then you're continuing in it. But really a direct modulation is a now we're in a new key, now we're in a new key, now we're in a new key. We're not really smoothing it out and transitioning. So here we have an example of a direct modulation. It's a little tricky to see, but there's our second key right here, D minor. So we start in F major, yada, 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 cadence. Right after the cadence, we're in a new key, yada, 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 yada. So remember, D minor and F major are relative minor and major. They have the same key signature. So we don't have to worry about this over here. We don't have to put in a new key signature mid-measure, but you can also see by looking at the notes in this 4-part writing that raised leading tone. That's a big hint that maybe we've gone from major, where we have this F major chord at the cadence, to minor. Also, we can look at that second cadence and clearly see that we're in D minor now. Here's an example from Cats. You can usually see a direct modulation easily by the change in key signature, especially if it's not to a relative major or minor where they would share the same key signature. So then we're in C major, and then we have this lead-in to measure 34, and now we're in A flat. So we have that key change happening. This is very, very common in more contemporary music and musicals, and especially musicals. So please listen to this version of Cats. There's your timestamp there. And I included this video, which I'm pretty sure you guys have seen because it's my favorite example to use when it comes to modulations, but also some other elements of music theory. This is the song that goes like this from Spamalot, where they joke about modulating and kind of asking for mercy from the pit orchestra. But modulations and direct modulations like this, where they just go from one note to the next note, and now you're in a new key. There isn't a lot of transition in between. It just, you change the key signature in the music, and there you have it. So give that a listen to. Very entertaining. So here we have modulations introduced by secondary dominants. You've seen some of this already in your study of secondary dominants and also leading tone chords. Here we have a 7 of 5 to 5, or just a 7 to 1. So using that secondary dominance as a pivot chord in order to get to the new key. It's very smooth. You will see some accidentals in the harmony. So if you notice that, it's in your analysis, think about what's happening there. Is there some sort of secondary function chord happening? And then the next step is it actually modulating? Are we continuing the phrase in that new key? Or are we just tonicizing in a new key and then going back to the original key? In this case, we're actually modulating and staying there and writing a phrase in that new key. You can also listen here for a direct modulation that doesn't sound so abrupt. Usually, if we're going back to the example by Bach, I'm probably the only one that laughed at that. If you're writing from a relative major, relative minor standpoint, it won't sound as abrupt as you think because you have the same key signature going. So give that a listen as well. Moving ahead. So when you're looking for modulations in your analysis, if you're given a score and you have to find them, you want to scan for any chromatic alterations first. Usually you'll see something unless it's from relative major to relative minor. But even in that case, you may see a raised leading tone or some melodic minor passage where you have the raised 6 and 7. Then you'll also want to scan for 5-1 bass motion. 5-1, that relationship is so strong, it can be used to tonicize or to modulate. You want to look at any cadences and also analyze any pivot area or potential modulation in both keys. So feeling very comfortable with your triads, feeling very comfortable with your chords, and which chords belong to each key will be helpful there. But this last bit is much more it's much more fine-tuned analysis. The first things that should stand out are those first 3 bullets. Looking at the cadences, looking for 5-1 bass motion, especially at a cadence, and looking for how long you've been within whatever key that cadence suggests. These things will show you where that modulation is, and then this part will help you locate maybe where it starts. So for example, here we have our da 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 dum dum da 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 dum dum da 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 dum. You've heard this a bunch of times. We have our Clementi Sonata in C major, and here we're modulating to G. But if we were to analyze this, we'd have to pretend like it's not done for you. We'd have to look for any accidentals. There's one, which means we're probably in a new key, whether it's major or relative minor. And then we can start looking right where that accidental happens and look for that 5-1 motion or that 7-1 motion. Remember that 7 chord can have dominant function. So here we have that 7 of 5 to 5 or the 7 to 1 in the new key. So we have this secondary function leading tone chord going to the dominant chord in C major, or we have that secondary function leading tone chord going to the tonic in the new key. So we have that 5-1 motion or that dominant to tonic motion with that 7 chord to the 1 chord in this new key. Moving ahead, just a few more slides. Looking at modulations in musical contexts. Here we can see we are in the key of C minor, and as we're going, now we are in the key of G minor. So you can start to see these accidentals being introduced. Usually held notes tell you that a harmony is important because they're being emphasized over time. So, and in this case, we can easily see our tonic harmony being emphasized there. So please give this recording a listen, and we're moving on to the next slide. Please read this slide. If you need to pause it on the video or look at your PowerPoint, I want to make sure you get this information, but I'm running short on time for this video, so I want to make sure that you see all of this. It's basically showing you how all the steps that are taken in order to harmonize a modulating melody effectively. And finally, here is an example of a melody that modulates, and here is an example of it harmonized. Thank you.